If you love what you hear, check out our authors Andreya, Stuart and N.A. Fulton on Amazon.com, and be sure to subscribe to our dark romance novels and stories podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast provider. Learn more about us at audioiron.com.
Wedding Bones. Chapter 1, 1811. Ardleigh, England. Still dizzy from the laudanum, heart pounding, the Viscountess of Winesley stared down at her dead husband's body. The rash, the vomit, the once handsome body folded double from abdominal pain, the blood on his pillow and under his head. Christ, how had it all gone so wrong? 'Tis not the injury but subsequent error that most frequently kills. Her father, 3 years dead, had told her this time and time again. She must keep her head. But she had every reason to panic. Panic was sensible at this moment. It was rational. It was necessary. Henry was dead. Clearly her poison had killed him. That meant she and Sophia were both going to hang. Who can you save? Her father had asked her that often in his final days. He must have said it 100 times during the cholera epidemic that had finally taken his life. She had tried to help him, had continued to work even when he faltered. But he had left her alone in the world with only homilies to guide her. Save who you can. Some will suffer but live if you do nothing. Some will die no matter what you do. To save lives, you must focus on those who will survive only with your help. Her father's long-ago words filled her mind. Dizzy, nauseated, she left her husband dead on the floor near his chamber pot, and stumbled back into her room, then let herself out its unlocked door into the dimly lit upper hall of the manor house. 4 beeswax candles in mirrored sconces on the walls, and the wide gap in the middle of the hall that admitted moonlight from the gallery, provided her with barely enough illumination to see her bare feet. Clad in just a thin lawn nightgown, she made her unsteady way down the hall to the servants' stair, using the wall for support. Never had the doctor's opiate left her feeling so ill and unsteady on her feet. Then again, had she not stirred and seen Henry's body through the open door to his room, she would have slept until morning. Half drugged as she was, it was a wonder she could walk at all. Stepping from the stairwell onto the 2nd floor of the manor, she saw its dozen doors all closed and dark, illuminated only by the moonlight that poured into the hall from the gallery it overlooked. Under the door closest to her, she saw a glimmer of light. As she crept toward it, she heard her sister sobbing hysterically inside. As her hand touched the brass handle of the door, she heard the low tones of a male voice. Her heart sank as she opened the door. There was Sophia, all of 15, held tight in the arms of her 17-year-old footman. The very tall and darkly handsome young man was still dressed in his livery, his blue braided jacket thrown over a chair. Sophia, cherubic face red from weeping, eyes closed, raiment of chestnut hair spilling everywhere, was wearing a thin shift that left nothing to the imagination. Could there be a more incriminating sight on earth? Robert Davies, having heard the door open, looked toward her. "My lady, forgive me. It is not what you think," he said. Andreya raised her hand to stop him from speaking more. She had no time for his excuses or his protestations of love. She knew why he was here, why Sophia was crying, and why Henry was dead. So the pair of them had taken it upon themselves to kill Henry. Well, had she not considered committing the same crime? Had she not planned for it? Who was she to judge these two? Sophia, astonished, cried out, "Oh, Andreya, I couldn't let him. I want only Robert. Please, I love him so." "Hush, be still," said Andreya. "My lady, she summoned me. She was distraught and I did not know what to do. I was going to bring her to you." Andreya, surrendering to the inevitable, said, "Stop, Robert. There's no need to explain. What's done is done." Andreya had no faith in Providence, but justice was something she could believe in. While a footman was not the match she would have chosen for her sister, Andreya recognized that Robert had earned the girl's devotion. A man who would risk the hangman's noose to protect your honor was as noble a man as might be found in this terrible world. This young man loved Sophia, and she loved him. That would have to be enough. Arya said, "We have no time for tears, my darling. If you wish to marry, you and Robert must leave now, within the hour. You must be very far away before anyone knows you are gone." Astonished, Sophia stared at her. Then she said, "You said it was impossible." Arya knew her sister must be in shock. This was an unimaginably terrible evening, and her sister was the soul of innocence. She had no real understanding of what she had done, or the penalty she and her beloved might be expected to pay. Arya said, "Everything is different now, Sophia. Rise and dress in your brown gown. The old one I gave you before we came here. Bind up your hair, put on your brown bonnet, and then your sturdy walking shoes. Robert is going to take you downstairs to wait for me. Then tonight you will let him walk with you into town." Mystified, Sophia said, "You want us to walk out tonight? It's long past midnight. What is happening?" Arya said, "We are very near London now, sister. The royal roads never sleep. Mail coaches run from the eastern ports into the city at all hours. Robert will take you into town and a coach will have you in London by morning. Tomorrow, Robert will book passage for both of you on a ship, just as we planned." Sophia went white. "You want me to go to Virginia? Alone?" Arya turned to Robert. "You wish to marry my sister, I presume?" Robert replied gravely, "I do, my lady, with all my heart." Arya said, "To have her, you must leave tonight. Will you do that?" Reobert looked stern. "But the Viscount has no claim on her." "The Viscount is dead," said Arya. Whatever the Viscount thought he owned, or believed he had a right to do, didn't matter any more. Robert stared at her. Sophia stared at her in disbelief, unable to make sense of the words. "Henry died! How? Did he fall?" Robert's eyes went from Arya to Sophia and back again. Arya said, "You must take her away. You must leave tonight." Sophia said, "I will not go to Virginia without you. We can't leave you here." Arya drew herself up. "I am a Viscountess now, and I have many duties I must perform, Sophia. And you are a grown woman now. Robert brought himself here all the way from Wales, and he has been to London 100 times. I am ordering him to take you into the city and travel with you to Virginia. It is just as you and I have discussed. I cannot come with you, for you must leave tonight, and I have important matters to attend to here. I will come in time." Arya continued, "You will go to Dr. Langley in Richmond exactly as we planned. You will leave word of where you are living. When I arrive, he will tell me where you can be found." To Robert she said, "Do you understand what I am asking you to do?" "Yes, my lady, I will take care of Sophia." Arya nodded. "Of course you do. Go quickly and quietly now. Meet me near the gate and I'll give you money to buy the things you need on your journey and to pay for your passage." Robert turned to Sophia and said, "Dress quickly, my darling. We must do as your sister says."
Sophia looked from Arya to Robert and back again. "Yes, Robert," she said docilely.
Arya left the room then, shutting the door softly behind her. As she crept down the corridor back to the servants' stair, she pressed her hand to her aching head and firmly rejected an impulse to say a prayer for the very young couple in love. Maybe God didn't exist. Perhaps he simply hated her. Arya didn't know which might be true, but she did know that no prayer of hers had ever been answered. In fact, quite the opposite. When she prayed for a thing, it was always denied her. Her mother had died despite all her prayers, as had her father. Her devout appeal to God for a painless, perhaps even pleasant wedding night had been answered with nothing but cruelty. She would never again pray. No prayer was required for all to go well. Simply adroit action. Day and night, people travelled along the Ardleigh Road for London. The road was a smooth, well-travelled thoroughfare, and the very heart of London was just 3 hours away. Day and night, ships set sail for the New World from the Pool of London. With enough money, Robert could put himself and his bride on some boat going to the New World. 1,000 couples made the journey every day. The world would not notice if tomorrow there were 1,001. Arya crept back up the servants' stair to her room. The twinkling stars she saw through the windows reassured her she had many hours until dawn. It was perhaps midnight. No one would seek Henry until after 9 the next morning, when he normally took breakfast. Arya entered her room and locked the door behind her. Moonlight pouring through the windows showed her bed, the standing mirror, her bureau littered with little bottles, her wardrobe, her chamber pot, and the pair of white upholstered chairs before the coals of her fire. All was still, calm and orderly, belying the horror next door. She padded across the floor to the open door between the rooms. She could not help but stare down at Henry, dead on the floor, illuminated by the weak light from the oil lamp near his bed. She saw the half-empty water glass, the empty whiskey glass, the pitcher of water, and the decanter of spirits. She'd been terrified of this hulking brute for so long, and he had hurt her so much, but now he was dead. She was not surprised her foxglove concoction made him dizzy, affecting the heart as it did. Overtaken by nausea, he must have risen from bed, only to swoon and strike his skull on something as he fell. Looking at the situation, she could not fathom how he had injured his head, but it hardly mattered now. Good riddance, she thought. You were an evil, bullying, brutish, lascivious beast of a man, and I'm glad to be shut of you, even if I hang. Arya moved to his locked money chest, which sat on the tall walnut dresser beside his body. She made sure her feet did not touch the blood that surrounded much of the area. It took her several minutes to find the key he used to lock the case. Henry had hidden it between the pages of a Bible he kept on the cabinet beside the box. Since Henry had never willingly parted the pages of that book, he assumed no one else would ever choose to do so either. As Arya inserted the key into the lock, she moved the little lamp on the bureau closer. This multi-drawer box was 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 1 foot high. Henry took the thing everywhere with him. It contained all the treasure he collected from cards, horse breeding, racing. Here he also stored the rents collected from estate farms. From time to time, when Henry travelled to London, he would take the case with him, and it would come back lighter due to the deposits he made in the Bank of England, where the bulk of his wealth was stored. Henry might have been the worst of men, but he had been canny with his investments. His not over-large estate produced quite a lot of revenue. He was in no sense land-rich and cash-poor. Arya opened the long, thin drawer at the bottom of the case to discover handfuls of silver and gold coins. Realizing she had nothing to put money in, she went into her room, found her old reticule, the one she had purchased when she was merely a doctor's daughter. She brought it back. Then she began dropping coins into the bag. She could not take all the money, for surely it would be missed. But she was certain she could take as much as half, with no one being the wiser. Henry, and only Henry, managed his funds. For a few moments she contemplated a man's gold ring, a sparkling necklace probably won in a card game, and a silver and ruby brooch that she found among the coins. These items were worth far more than the gold and silver coins she had already collected, but they might be instantly recognized as stolen as well. Reluctantly, she left them in the drawer and relocked the case. Returning the key to the pages of the Bible, she returned to her room. Taking pen and paper, she wrote a brief note introducing her sister to Dr. Langley, asking him to offer her every aid in remembrance of their father. She signed this using her maiden name, then sealed the missive with red wax. She penned a second note she left unsealed. This contained a list of instructions. She was not entirely certain Robert could read, but Sophia certainly could. Arya instructed the couple to go to London, purchase clothes and other items suitable for young immigrants, and to book passage to any city in the New World. It really mattered not which city they selected, since they could travel to Virginia once they had arrived in the colonies. Arya knew the passage would cost as much as £16 for a private cabin. She warned them to hide their money on their person, setting aside a small amount to give to thieves if they were robbed. When Arya was done writing, she stood up, moved to the window and looked down. It was a moonless night, but she could just make out Robert and her sister waiting under a tree near to the manor gate. Much recovered from the drug she'd taken earlier in the night, Arya let herself out of her room, closing the door firmly behind her. She darted toward the balustrade in the middle of the hall and looked down into the gallery at the center of the house. From there she could see the checkered marble floor of the foyer 3 floors below, could see the open doors into the library and drawing rooms. Nothing stirred. She listened to the silence for a long moment, then slipped down the necessary 2 flights of marble steps in bare feet. 100 of Henry's dead forebears reviled her from every picture frame on every wall as she passed by, and she had to remind herself she did not care if these dead aristocrats hated her. She hated them as well. They had bred a monster for her to marry. Reaching the front door, she unlocked it, pulled it open enough to let her out, then closed it behind her. She looked around the silent courtyard, then rushed across the muddy stone drive. Near the gate, she found the grass wet and cold on her feet. She handed her sister the reticule, then pulled her into a hard hug. Sophia began to plead with her. "Oh, Arya, please come with us. I'm too afraid to go without you." Arya spoke sternly. "Don't be a silly goose. Criminals, the poor, working men and families set sail every day for the New World and arrive in 6 weeks entirely alive and well. I expect nothing less of you. I will follow as soon as matters here are settled. You are to think only of yourself and Robert now." "Jeez." Arya drew Robert aside so Sophia could not hear what she said. "You will both hang if you are not on a ship within a day. You must fly like the very wind. You have all the funds and instructions you need in her little bag. Save my sister's life, Robert, and you will ever and always be my own dear brother." Robert, clearly moved, pulled Arya to him and held her tight. "I swear it, my lady." Then he pecked Arya on the cheek, pulled back, and met her eyes soberly. For Sophia's benefit, he said, "Sophia and I must away, my lady." Turning to his beloved, Robert said, "Come, we must catch the mail coach. It leaves within the hour." Arya watched the young couple in dark clothes run through the open gate and onto the road that would take them to a new life. When Arya had first come here, still wearing the bruises from the sexual assaults that had comprised her honeymoon, Henry's well-sprung carriage and fast horse had navigated the road from London to Ardleigh in just over 2.5 hours. They had left late in the afternoon and arrived after dark. Arya had been shocked at how busy the wide road was despite the late hour, and Henry had rudely remarked on her ignorance. "I have married myself a country bumpkin," he had said. "In your sleepy bog, come sundown, I suppose everyone goes to bed. Well, I have brought you to London, to the heart of a maritime empire that spans the world. 1 million souls live in the city proper, and the road to Ardleigh sees 12 mail coaches a day. A letter sent from Southend-on-Sea will reach Buckingham Palace in under a day. A letter from Cambridge will arrive in 2. Arya never understood why he spoke to her so unkindly, treated her so rudely, or why he had married her at all, beyond the obvious. She had thought him handsome to start. He was over 6 feet tall, broadly built, fair-haired, fair-skinned, with a wide brow, thick neck, broad back and muscular chest. After her father died, when he had courted her, he had treated her with a kind of hollow romanticism, painting over the transaction of buying her as a bride, by paying her father's debts with references to her beauty and grace. But from the second the knot was tied, he had been nothing but chiding, controlling, and cold. 17 miles to London. By dawn, Sophia and Robert should be at the shipyards, where they could buy a berth and purchase all else they needed. By sunset, or shortly thereafter, they could be at sea. Certainly, in 2 days or 3 they could be aboard a boat. Vessels left for the New World with every tide. Every ship carried passengers, since they were the highest paid cargo of all. Sophia, at least, would be free. And if Arya had to hang to save her sister's life, so be it. Save who you can, as her father said. Arya darted back across the yard, let herself back inside the house and locked the door. She listened to the great silent manor, waiting for any sound of alarm, looking for any sign of wakefulness. Instead, the weight of the monstrous house bore down on her, silent and still as a mausoleum. Sophia was gone, and Arya felt her absence. All joy was draining from her world. She would have no one, not a single soul, who cared for her. She would be entirely alone from now on. Arya forced herself to abandon her maudlin thoughts. Sophia was not safe yet. Arya was not yet bound for the gallows. There was everything to win and everything to lose in the next few days. She must take stock. Henry had never seen fit to fully staff his country manor. Now that Sophia and Robert had gone and Henry was dead, a butler, a lady's maid, 2 footmen, a cook, 2 housemaids, and 2 scullery maids remained in the house. 9 people on 4 floors. The lady's maid and housemaids had rooms on the 4th floor, under the eaves. The footman, cook, butler, and scullery maids had rooms at the rear of the house near the kitchens. In the coach house, 4 groomsmen, a gamekeeper, and an odd assortment of stable boys were bedded down. All was silence. Andreya ran across checkerboard marble floor of the foyer, up the marble steps to the first landing, then up the second set of steps to the 3rd floor. She darted down the dark hall into her bedroom and locked her door. She then stepped into her husband's room to once again examine the slab of meat Henry had become. Thankfully, or unthankfully as the case might be, her experience helping her father during the cholera epidemic had all but eliminated her fear of the dead. Moving the light near to Henry's face, she saw it was twisted into a rictus grimace. A quick pair of pokes from her index finger let her know his arms and legs were already stiffening. The vomit covering his chest was drying into a hard, vile-smelling paste. Moving the light, she could just make out a deformation of his skull over his left temple. The flesh was swollen, bruised, and the skin had been cut somehow, letting his blood pour onto the floor. She stood up and tried to make sense of what she saw. He had been vomiting into his chamber pot, had tried to stand, had fainted and hit his head on something. Was that right? Looking about, she couldn't ascertain what his head might have hit as he fell. As she moved the light closer to the bed, she saw there was blood on his pillow. Had Henry taken the poison, fallen, risen, gone back to bed, gotten up, then fallen again? She could not make sense of the blood in the bed in any other way. And when had he died? She had gone to bed after dinner, expecting him to come to her not long later. She had taken the laudanum in preparation. But as she had no new bruises or other telltale signs of Henry's aggressive sexual congress, she knew he had not. What had gone on here as she slept? Andreya forced herself to stop trying to figure out what had happened to Henry. The great cruel oaf was dead. That was all that mattered. The question now was, what should she do? Clean him up? Put him in a nightshirt? Get him into bed so the household could believe he had died mysteriously in his sleep? Henry weighed well over 200 pounds. She weighed perhaps 110. He was naked, and his limbs were already stiff. She could not imagine how she could stuff his corpse into one of his dressing gowns, and there was no way she could lift someone so heavy 3 feet onto the bed. No, she must leave him where he lay. She looked at the water glass on his bedside table. It sat beside a water pitcher, a whiskey bottle, and a glass that had once held whiskey. She saw the water glass was more than half full. When she picked it up and held it to her nose, she could smell the foxglove concoction she had brewed up just days ago. Obviously, Henry had tasted the poison because he hadn't emptied the water glass, as was his custom. He drank a full glass of whiskey and a full glass of water every night before bed. She should never have told Sophia of Henry's whiskey and water habit. She should not have gone into such great detail on how she would do him in. If she had not, Sophia never would have taken matters into her own hands. Andreya carried the glass into her room, raised one of her windows, and dumped most of the liquid outside. When there were only a few teaspoons left, she returned to Henry's room, filled the glass to the brim with water, and drank it in one long gulp. Hurriedly, striving to keep the foul mixture down, she filled the glass from the pitcher twice more, and drained it each time before she returned it empty to its place on Henry's table. The more the poison was diluted, the less dangerous it became. So her father had told her once. But was that always true? For every poison? She hoped so. Christ, how had Henry taken so much of the mixture? It was so incredibly bitter and foul-tasting. Were she to ever use this poison again, she would add it to spirits, not to water. Feeling truly ill now, she left Henry's room and went back to her own bed. It was only as she was about to slide her feet under the blankets that she realized they were mud-blackened and her dress was green-stained by grass. How would she ever explain that? Had she tracked dirt all the way from the front door to this room? Andreya got out of her bed, pulled off her nightgown, and poured water from the ewer onto it to make it wet. Fighting extreme nausea, she washed her feet clean. Then she rolled the gown into a ball and stuck it way under her mattress where the housemaids wouldn't find it, unless the bed was fully stripped and the mattress turned. She would have to get rid of the nightdress in the next day or two. Walking to her wardrobe, she found another gown to put on, a flannel nightdress that was more suitable for winter than spring. Still, she was too ill to search for something lighter. Shaking now, she crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed. Something made her turn and look at the mirror. She had never known a murderer, had never seen one to her knowledge, and yet that was what she had become. Her father had taught her how to cure. Henry had forced her to kill. The woman in the glass looked not so different from Sophia in feature. Her hair was gold and auburn, not chestnut brown, and her eyes looked like green coals in her head. But she too was slender, and had two delicate, almost elfin features. Who would ever believe such a young woman could commit murder? No one, she hoped. A wave of nausea suddenly hit her very hard. Instantly she was at her own chamber pot, vomiting the fish she'd had for dinner into it. How long ago had she eaten? 4 hours. She couldn't remember. With each wave of nausea came a wave of weakness. She soon found herself kneeling over her chamber pot, her body doing all it could to expel the poison she had ingested. She had taken no more than a few teaspoons of the tincture she'd brewed, and already she was so violently ill. Would she die as well? When she could expel nothing more, she got herself into bed, got a pillow under her head, and covered her shaking body with the linen sheet and wool blankets. Moments later she vomited again, covering herself with bile. Ah, well, she thought weakly, the worse I looked when they find me, the better. Mr. Bullens would call Dr. Mackay, and Andreya hoped he would say she and Henry had experienced a sudden sickness caused by spoiled food or disease. The good doctor was wrong every single minute of every single day, but this time, Andreya hoped his errors would favour her. Please God, let Sophia and Robert reach Virginia safely. I will accept the hangman's noose if it will save Sophia's life and let her live free. Please God, if you only ever answer one of my prayers, let this be the one. Wedding Bones by Andreya Stuart. Copyright 2024, Nancy Fulton. All rights reserved. Music licensed from Pond 5.